Since I was very young, I was always the guy to be called a bore, annoying, and way too critical because I never seemed to like the same kind of media as everyone else. I scoffed at the idea of pop music while blasting heavy metal over my headphones, whirled my eyes at popular movie franchises while vehemently watching Kubrick and Nolan, and would mock everyone following celebrities and using social media, hypercritically claiming I was above all of that. Yes, back then you could have rightly called me a jerk. And with the passing of time and gaining of maturity, I have left many of those radical elitist points of view behind. However, as a recently inducted university undergrad studying media studies, I have found out that many of my previous overly critical thoughts do in fact present some academic credentials. To the dismay of the friends and family I used to consume media with, I am afraid that my initiation into media studies might have only made me more critical. Among the many things the introductory level media studies course, shoutouts Meds 160, has taught me, I believe the most important intellectual cornerstone of the class has been to teach media literacy. As a creator and consumer of media, I believe it is incredibly important to understand the mechanisms that dictate how media is created and received, as well as how it shapes and influences our thoughts and beliefs, and with that, our perception of reality. Many fancy words, I know, but ultimately what I mean is that in today's world, especially in privileged Western societies where media plays such a constant and integral part of our lives, everyone would do well with a little more understanding of the forces that drive their mediated consumption. Of course, I might be biased, and that is also something we learned in the course. You can never completely rid any media object of bias, but I hope I can portray a little bit of what has caused me to fall in love with this area of study in this short video. Or maybe not so short. Once you come in contact with critical media analysis, it really is hard to escape its, for lack of a better or lighter word, cynical mindset when consuming media. For a person like me that, as previously mentioned, already had overly critical tendencies, it really is hard to see much positivity in what seems to be an ocean of bad and even sometimes evil media content. In the class, and this is directly paraphrased from the prompt I was given for this very final project that you're watching, we have talked about media critique and how either implicitly or explicitly media impacts us negatively. So nowadays, even more than before, whenever I see a movie, listen to a music record, or most importantly, for the purpose of this video and this channel for that matter, play some video games, I am constantly looking for cliches, biases, or just plain structural and conventional errors, or better, any possible reason I can salvage to critique what I am consuming. The prompt goes on to say, for this option of the project, you should think about what media could or should be. I have obviously chosen that option, and for my submission, which is this video right here, I will highlight two of my favorite games from the last couple of years as examples of what, in my humble opinion, the medium of computer games should strive for. Each chosen game has been paired with one primary issue of contemporary media production that we discussed during our lessons. As previously stated, all of what is presented here is my opinion, my particular perception of reality filled with my own personal and emotional connections and biases, although I will try my best to present these opinions with concise arguments and, when possible, factual evidence. So without any further ado, let's get right into it, starting with the game you are seeing right now and the one that I most play nowadays. Okay, starting with my favorite current multiplayer shooter game, and kind of an addiction to be completely honest, Rainbow Six Siege. I have played this game since the beginning of 2016, shortly after its release, and am now approaching 800 hours of playtime. That information is just to put a little context on how constant this game has been part of my playing habits in the last couple of years. I could list a dozen reasons as to why Siege has become one of my favorite first-person shooter games, but I believe there is a main one that has kept me coming back and playing all those years. That reason, and I do believe many of the other Siege players agree with me on this, is the continued dedication of the Ubisoft devs, the creators and developers behind Rainbow Six Siege, have demonstrated in maintaining the game healthy and full of content, and the consequent great relationship that habit has constructed between the audience and the creators. An interactive medium by conception, video games usually demonstrate a higher degree of audience participation and involvement, especially in multiplayer games designed to be a service over extended periods of time, like Siege. In other words, in video games, the players have naturally more control over what they are playing. Nonetheless, game industry companies always attempt to influence and cheat gamers to accept practices and products that only help the company profit motive and actually hamper the playing experience for the consumers. Many examples come to mind when thinking about this. Perhaps the biggest and most famous one is Electronic Arts, that has seemingly built a solid reputation of screwing players over microtransactions, broken game releases, paid DLC after paid DLC, and many other examples. While EA is definitely not alone, it does seem to me that in later years the gaming public has begun to speak out and oppose more strongly these nefarious practices, and as a consequence of that, companies like Ubisoft have begun acting more in favor of the audience's point of view for many of their games, undertaking many of the actions that actual players believe are best for the game, even when it sometimes goes against their company interests. The result are games that actually become better and keep acquiring newer players over time, even when their original releases were riddled with problems. And the logical conclusion to that is that the player community actually knows what it's talking about. After all, we are the ones playing, right? There's no game longevity without us. There are many games and examples where Ubisoft has implemented this model of longevity-oriented and community feedback-based game development. For Honor, the newer Assassin's Creed titles, Wildlands, and of course, for the purpose of this section of the video, Rainbow Six Siege. While the game is certainly not perfect and suffers from issues of technical nature such as netcode and connectivity, as well as shady monetizing practices that are directly the fault of the Ubisoft developers, the company has showed a willingness to adhere to community feedback, and that is very important. The most recent example is the rolling back of the censorship changes for the Chinese version of the game, but there are many others that a quick Google search will entail. In more technical terms of Marxist and organizational analysis of media, as well as reception analysis, the company Ubisoft takes an approach that is not the most common in the media industry world. The most common actions of media conglomerates, not only in the games industry, but in all of media production, are to always chase after the highest amount of profit, usually to the detriment of the media objects, in this case, games, quality, longevity, and overall reception. It is from this that microtransactions, blatant division of content for paid DLC, and other less than desirable ideas have come from. Similarly, in the reception side of things, it is not uncommon for media companies to sometimes completely disregard audience feedback, pretentiously assuming that the entire driving force of media is behind the creator and not, as is the case in most instances, behind a relationship between the creator and audience. Of course, this is a very summarized way of putting it, but the bottom line is that media quality suffers from all of this, and ultimately who pays the price are the consumers. Thankfully, companies are responding to the angry feedback from gamers, and I believe Ubisoft's mindset in constructing healthier relationships with their consumer communities without many of the toxic practices of the gaming world may be a direct result from that. Anyway, the point is that Rainbow Six Siege has been so enjoyable for me and for the millions of players that consistently load up the tactical shooter. And that is much due to the fact that Ubisoft is transparent, compliant, and respectful with their audience, creating a healthy relationship that should be an example for other game companies to follow. Second on the list of this video is not actually one game in particular, but a household franchise that has seen a rebirth in the last couple of years and highlights one of the most contemporary issues in media. Representation of marginalized groups is certainly a topic for concern and is increasingly getting more attention from consumers and creators alike, rightly so, I might add. But while many media objects nowadays seem to have started to only dip their toes in the waters of respectful media representation of traditionally oppressed groups, franchises like the Tomb Raider series have been doing it for years. It is no surprise that the objectification, underrepresentation, and sexist depiction of women is widespread in the gaming industry, and the activity of gaming itself is mostly associated as male, particularly young male, territory. The game industry, as well as many other media industries, have seen a gradual shift in the righteous correction of these negative media vices in recent years, and games like the new Tomb Raider rebooted franchises are shining examples of how to do that correctly. While I cannot speak for the older games, as the first one came out in 1996, 3 years before I was born, I can certainly attest for the quality of the newer installations, those being Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. There are many reasons as to why these games are so appealing to me and other gamers, as they are generally well-crafted single-player experiences. But the quality that I wish to highlight here is the incredible representation of the main playable character and face of the franchise, Lara Croft, the determined female adventurer that is one of the most badass characters in gaming history, period. For me, Lara Croft is a bright example of how females should be portrayed in strong leading roles. Let's focus on the second installment of the rebooted franchise, Rise of the Tomb Raider, which by the way is the one I am currently doing a playthrough of in this channel. Shameless plug on a school project. Jesus Christ. Before I begin the more detailed analysis, however, let me just preface by saying that I have not yet completed the game, so I might be mistaken in a couple of things I mentioned here. However, I do believe I have a grasp of how Lara is portrayed in the game, and that is what matters most to this video. So in terms of writing and voice acting, I feel the game lacks a little, which includes the character of Lara, but that's a personal gripe I have with it, and that's not that significant for the purpose of this analysis. What is significant though is just how much Lara's sheer determination and steadfastness drives her in the plot of the game, causing it to progress. A common characteristic of weaker protagonists, and as such somewhat commonly associated with female protagonists in media, passiveness is definitely not present in the character of Lara Croft. Passive protagonists are characters which the plot or story happen to, while active characters are the ones which the story happen because of. Everything that happens in the plot of Rise of the Tomb Raider happens because Lara went after it and caused it to happen. It happened because she disagreed with everyone around her, and happened because in the face of danger she chose to follow her obsession. Even though I might personally disagree with that decision, one cannot help but feel a deep respect for just how far that woman is willing to go, and at just how strong she seems. And if a male college student feels that way, then I truly believe that female representation in this case has been righteously nailed. It is for these reasons that I point to Tomb Raider as a success story in female representation in games. Lara Croft manages to break many of the cliches and biases usually present in female protagonism. While it is great progress that female protagonists and characters in general are increasing and getting more spotlight in gaming and in other forms of media, many of them still present male-dominated stereotypes and cliches. One of them is character passiveness, as mentioned earlier, but another one is the apparent assertion that for females to be present in the plot of games, movies, TV shows, and the like, there needs to be some sort of romantic entanglement with a male character. Apart from the fact that this is obviously heterosexually oriented, it manages to discredit many of the characters' motivations in the plot, limiting them to romantic relationships that are, more often than not, controlled by the man involved. This is another cliche that the game manages to break, but sadly, the recent movie of the same IP did not. That flick was the 2018 Tomb Raider, created with the objective of cashing out on the success of the rebooted games, no doubt. The movie itself was pretty terrible in my opinion, suffering from numerous structure, writing, and character development related issues, but they also had to include a potential romantic interest in not one, but two of the male characters that were not even present in the game that the movie is based on. While the movie does not fully realize any of these potential romances, and I might be reading too much into it with too much media studies oriented cultural criticism, the story choice of including these male characters did leave a question in my head. Does there always need to be romance when a female is involved in a story? Can't a woman just do her damn role by herself? The answers to those questions are respectively no and yes, as clearly demonstrated by Rise of the Tomb Raider. Nevertheless, the game is not perfect, and I would do a disservice if I did not point out something that rubs me the wrong way and is somewhat related to this female representation issue. That thing is the fact that Lara is just a bit of a punching bag throughout the game, suffering beating after beating, usually in the form of admittedly well-crafted action sequences where she is thrown around like a ragdoll. I know that this is a sort of a defining characteristic of the Tomb Raider IP, and it would be a stretch to claim that it is only present due to sexist predispositions to watch female characters suffer through uncontrollable physical strains. Still, there's a certain voyeuristic character that does bother me a bit, reminding me of the psychoanalytic qualities of the male gaze. Like I said, it is kind of cool in a somewhat disturbing way to see her get thrown around in these action sequences and even killed in these gruesome scenes where she gets mauled by a bear or falls headfirst into a spike, and you see it all. I might be pushing it with this one, but it's just a thought. Anyway, all in all, I think Rise of the Tomb Raider and the character of Lara Croft in general is a very good example of how to do strong female protagonists. So originally I planned of including a third game in this video that is honestly my favorite game ever. However, looking already at the length of this video here and seeing that I did what I always do, started talking and never stopped as long as things come to mind, which is a never-ending process of course, I decided to scrap that idea and maybe do a separate video on that some other time. I hope you enjoyed this one, however, and could at least learn a little bit of the many things I learned during Media Studies 160. Depending on how well this video is received and the feedback I get from it, you can expect the other analysis video of the third game to come shortly. Anyway, let me stop talking because I already did too much of that, so let me just finish this video saying that next week I will be going back to Brazil for winter break, so I do not know how the upload schedule for that channel is going to be like during that period. I don't plan on stopping the uploads and will keep you posted on what I can do. Alright, that's it for me on this one. Leave a like, subscribe, but most importantly a comment down below saying what you thought of this more academic oriented video and how you think I can improve this content. See you guys later. Peace.